Hi, Dominique, and welcome to another edition of the Week Ahead. How are you doing?
Very well, Andrew. I see that you are wearing a scarf. It's the weather in London.
Yes, it is um, hailing outside in 2 degrees. But besides that, it's the weather is nice and it's actually freezing in our house. Um, how are you doing? I don't know if you're still shocked about the LA Laker basketball trade. You may not know.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the 250 executive orders that I've had to keep track with for the past 2 weeks. I've
On top of that, you
survived.
have the Luka Doncic trade. For our listeners, Dominique's based in Los Angeles. Obviously payrolls just came out, just to give everyone a quick timestamp. Obviously that's going to dominate a lot of the thing, but let's kind of dive into your thoughts on everything that's happened the past week, market reaction, kind of a lot of strategy from the Trump administration. Yeah, what are your kind of big takeaways?
So my takeaway is actually that we are going through a revolution, that the speed of the executive orders is basically Trump wanting to act before he can be stopped by counterpowers like judicial powers, the courts, um, uh, you know, elected officials. But I think the revolution is, in the economic domain. Thank God we don't have to talk about the politics. The economics is already complicated enough. But I think what they want to do is a much more, and that's what Besant has been saying, they want to have a much more private sector driven economy, and also much more domestic driven, manufacturing driven. And by the way, I'm starting to think this is not just about manufacturing jobs, but also about defense. There is a very interesting interview or panel with Elon Musk at West Point, where he discusses the impact of new technology on defense. And one of the points he makes is that the US has a problem with production capacity,
Yeah, sure.
which goes with deindustrialization. And many industries are dual use, telecom equipment, car, manufacturing, drones, obviously. So I think the reshoring is not just about finding good paying jobs, because let's be honest, you want a good paying job in manufacturing, you need a STEM degree. It's all about robotics, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's also about rebuilding US defense capabilities. Um, so basically, the revolution is more private sector, more manufacturing. And, if you want to do a revolution, obviously you cannot be incremental. And I think that's why we've seen this absolutely furious pace of changes. Um, so to me, the big one is the budget. Trump wants huge tax cuts above and beyond the extension of his first mandate tax cut, which anyway only expire at the end of this calendar year. But he wants no tax on Social Security, on overtime, on tips. He wants to restore the state and local government tax deduction. So this adds up, and it's going to require massive expenditure cuts to get funded. So let's see. The Republicans are having difficulties agreeing among themselves, because you have some fiscal conservative who really want to see a decline in the deficit, but it looks like they are getting there. Next week, we will have a blueprint. And I think that's also when we find out what's happening with tariff, because I really think that tariffs are proceeding on two tracks. What we saw over the past week is a sort of opportunistic track, where the administration singles out countries that it wants concessions from and imposes super high tariff. But I think there is another track to support that reshoring, which is much more gradual. And this one is going to come through the budget. So let's see what happens next week.
So what do you mean it'll go through the budget? So
I think
Congress will actually approve
yes,
that, and it's
yes,
okay.
because the presidential powers to raise tariff are very short term. Like the law that Trump used required him to declare an emergency, and also tariff have some short term cost, as we both know.
Right.
And so to limit those costs, I think the administration will want to make tariff predictable and pre-announced and gradual. And obviously, this is more the style of Congress than of President Trump. So that's another reason to introduce those long-term tariffs through the budget. But so we should get a sense, I hope, next week.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I think you wrote a piece, but also I see that you posted interest in the chat. It's quite interesting, which is it's kind of like three things. Initially I thought it was two, but now I think it's three, which is one is tariffs used as a weapon to get some kind of action. And this was like against Mexico or Canada. And then two is potentially tariffs as a way to get a country to encourage to buy more US goods, which is kind of something that we discussed third, in the previous administration. But this tariffs as a way of raising some revenue to offset tax cuts, that seems more like, I think the third thing seems more likely than the second, because the second, it's, as we saw with China, it's very hard to police that and really kind of push.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, how do they get to this happy medium without kind of completely destroying integrated supply chains, but also raising revenue and generally making it more attractive for other parts of the supply chain to say, oh, you know what, I'll just find a US supplier for this instead of getting it from somewhere else. And I guess how he can do that, but in a gradual way that doesn't completely piss off. But other countries and stuff, they will get pissed off. But I guess the advantage the US has, it is by far the largest consumer of foreign, made goods. It's, probably the largest market, I guess, that between that and China. So it really and it has a massive trade surplus. So in most countries, trade deficit in most countries or regional blocks, it's not equal. So the US has a lot more power to do that.
100%. And also Trump is trying to woo American voters, not foreign voters. So as long as he can keep real wages, which is, by the way, what Besant was saying yesterday and the day before and during the hearing, he's going to deal with the affordability crisis by raising real wages. What this means is as long as they can get nominal wages to rise faster than inflation, obviously within reasonable limit. I'm not talking about double-digit wage or inflation so close to where we are.
Today. Like today's
exactly, which is a nice segue into the
Yeah.
NFP.
Yeah, but just to finish on that, so Besant's, I guess Besant, their holy grail is, can we get wages growing faster than inflation without stoking too much inflation and net have the entire yield curve come down because we've cut spending or government spending or something like that's. Yeah, I kind of agree with one of the clients saying about threading the needle, because that is kind of, it looks like they can do this just by taking out a lot of undocumented workers. I mean, but how you can get that without restoking inflation? Do you think that they're going to be able to,
so they need to implement really strong competition policy.
Yeah.
And in my view, that's one thing that the policy mix under Biden was missing. the relationship between competition policy and inflation. And I think those guys, I mean, this new administration, they get it. I mean, when Besant talks about the income share of labor, he understands that squaring the circle, an important part of that is going to be keeping a lead on prices. And since they want wages to go up, it means that profit margins and the share of profits in income is going to come down, which is again consistent with his saying this is mainstream time, Main Street time. Wall Street will do well enough, but perhaps not as well as in the past.
So I guess the focus could be things like healthcare, insurance, pharmaceuticals.
So healthcare is a big one. There is a bipartisan bill on pharmacy, PBM, pharmacy benefit managers, where you've had some of the most egregious abuses. Also, I mean, this is a little anecdote. It's not important in the grand scheme of things, but it shows how the politics have changed. There is a bipartisan bill, I think, in the House to cap credit card rates at 10%, which is one of Trump's campaign promises. So I think we're really
Let's see if that
in
passes.
revolutionary times, where we're going to have fairly deep changes in economic relationship.
Yeah. And quick one on the defense. So, okay, so I understand, I think even Vivek, before whatever happened to him, said clearly the US needs to focus much more on drone production and drone technology, which I'm assuming Elon probably agrees with. But I guess I didn't hear the other thing is need to significantly build up capacity for like ammunition, I guess, like even bullets and Okay. Yeah, that seems yeah. I mean, listen, I think we've said, a few weeks ago, never seen an administration this kind of bold, and we'll see how it all works out. But a lot of it kind of makes sense.
And you want to move before the established interests that you are trying to disrupt, I mean, dislodge from being the dominant interest, before they have a chance to get back at you. And I think that's why it's going so fast.
One quick before we go on, so why implement the no tax on Social Security benefits?
Because that's what he promised. That's what Trump promised during the campaign. And I think, I was also listening to Steve Bannon. So this is how I spend my time, listening to people talking. And, he made it clear that the plan is to make the economy much more private sector driven. So to increase the demand for labor, but through private demand, rather than public demand.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always tell my story that actually I was friendly and a very good friend of mine, and he's watching this, was best friends with Andrew Breitbart before the whole experience. Andrew's a unique individual. Okay, cool. So what's your big take on the payrolls? Let's focus on that, I guess.
So I want to be cautious. At the very least, I think we can argue that it shows a tighter labor market, right? Lower unemployment, faster wage growth. I think hours are down, but that data is a little noisy. Also, you have a trend of lower full-time work people prefer. So the proportion.
So that's why you think it went. Yeah, that's why it was good.
Yeah.
I just remember that JP Morgan, they always kind of looked at that as kind of a good sign of a strengthening or weakening in the US economy. It was hours worked per week. But I can see you're saying if people are more moving to flexible hours, and this is just it's more of like a systematic, structural change.
Yeah, and it could be a sign of emerging labor shortages, basically. As you told me, there is evidence that workers migrant workers are not showing up for work out of concerns that they will be deported. I don't think it impacted this payroll much because the survey week is the week of the 12th, while the deportation really started after inauguration. I mean, some started before based on anecdotal evidence, but it's really gone in full swing through inauguration. But it's possible that these fewer hours are basically people a bit worried about raids from ICE and, putting in fewer hours. But in general, I would argue that my view, which I mean, I was a bit early, which I published in November, that we are moving towards much lower payroll, but due to labor supply, so low, but enough to balance the labor market. I think this is the first month that where we are seeing this pattern, which, by the way, is also what Powell mentioned in his press conference, that going forward with less immigration, we would need lower payrolls to balance the labor market. So speaking about Powell, I don't think he's very, I mean, obviously he wants America to do well, but in terms of inflation, this 50 basis point increase in wages is not exactly what he was looking for, especially since the latest data on productivity shows that productivity growth is actually slowing down. It's too early to declare that the acceleration was a blip, but the trend is not looking good.
Right. On the productivity, okay, let's go into that for a second. On the productivity, I remember us discussing, and I think I had the question at the time, which is, if you look at the production for 100 workers, but actually there's really 110 workers because 10 of those workers are not in the system. It will look like those 100 workers are producing, let's say, 6 to 8% more than 100 workers with no, with no illegal people, workers. And it is part of the reduction in productivity possibly that, or the numbers assess even undocumented workers anyway?
So that is a very legitimate concern, that under measurement of labor has artificially boosted productivity. However, there is a very well-researched piece from the St. Louis Fed that argues it's not the case. I'm not sure. We just got a big increase in the level of the labor force because the Census Bureau finally, like 3 years after actually they revise population estimate every year, and they've increased their estimate by 3 million. I mean, or their revision means that the population 16 years and older is 3 million larger. So let's see.
So per worker, the productivity just went down.
I don't know, but we're going to see with the next productivity print.
Right. And obviously next month the productivity is going to skyrocket with DeepSeek.
Well, who knows? Stranger things have happened.
Yeah, it's a joke. Okay, and then for the week ahead, any big things? Obviously, policy, is a big thing too. But any kind of data stuff that you expect, and do you expect them to announce anything on tariffs, focus on Europe soon, or do you think the focus really will be more on this working with Congress for them to implement like this gradual kind of global tariff type approach?
So I think they are doing both. I think, this week, congressional leaders had repeated meetings with President Trump. So I think they are getting close to their blueprint budget, so the budget resolution. So definitely I'm hoping this week. And in terms of tariffs, there's no question that the Europeans are next. For some reason, the Brits have escaped, but there
Well, I
is
think they don't have a they don't have a good surplus from my
yeah,
understanding.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's roughly balanced. I mean, the
right,
American data shows the American have a surplus.
right.
The
The
UK
UK's
data
done a
shows
great
the
job
UK.
killing
Yeah,
their own manufacturing over the last kind of 10, 15
well,
years.
I
So,
mean, the data is making both of them happy, I guess.
right,
But there is there are a really interesting op-ed from the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and also an interview with Megyn Kelly, where
right,
he said, we want to refocus our attention to the Western Hemisphere. We want to have better immigration control, supply chains within the Western Hemisphere, defense, better integration of defense. And so it means that countries that are not in the Western Hemisphere, I mean, obviously China, it's a big competitor, but Europeans, they are in trouble, especially Denmark. Rubio explains that for the US, getting Greenland is a matter of national security because the trade routes through the Arctic are becoming much more valuable,
yeah,
especially with climate change and less ice. And that's why the US thinks it needs Greenland. So I would expect Denmark to be in for extra pressure, but the Europeans as well,
yeah.
Uh, I expect them to get tariff along everybody else in the budget law, but also to wake up one morning and find that President Trump has posted on Truth Social and that they are up for, I'm not sure, 25% tariffs or something.
My feeling is that there's a risk that Trump kind of looks at the world and says, well, there's really two superpowers. One is obviously the US and the other is China. And in China's backyard, is it really worth the US exposing themselves, fighting a potential war, and defending Taiwan and other areas? Um, but what we should do is absolute focus on dominating, having the best possible relationships, financial, military, and economic within the North and South Americas. Um, and then Europe's kind of left on their own. Um, I think the idea of Europe should do more probably makes a lot of sense, but I also hope the US doesn't completely disregard their kind of strong interest in Asia as well. But I'm sure places like Japan too, he probably will, I'm assuming he will expect for them to start focusing more on defense, Japan, South Korea, Australia as well. And but that would be I'm not sure that's best long-term strategy, but that's what it seems like the kind of the strategy. And then Middle East, he'll try and have a good relationship with Saudi and obviously Israel, but kind of it'll be like the strongest in each region that kind of will have a little bit more leeway than they would have in years past, where the US is the world's policeman for most things.
100%. Also, we have a president who is highly transactional.
Yeah.
So he's going to want things in exchange for the US military umbrella. So one thing he's definitely after, because it's such a core of their program, is lower energy prices. And I think there will be pressure on allies to pump more, possibly a deal with Russia. So one thing to look for next week is a Munich Security Conference, where the US will unveil its plan for Ukraine peace. If some deal can be reached with Russia, who knows? I mean, they could export more, but definitely uh, more oil and lower prices. That's super
Yeah.
important to the administration.
Well, I guess obviously Saudi is the one that probably has the most flexibility. Maybe UAE a little bit as well to really add, and he would have to get that kind of support. And I saw that it he's maybe a little bit less combative towards Iran, um, which is a little bit surprising. I guess it's also
There is a rumor that President Trump would like to implement a grand bargain in the Middle East and have his own version of the JCPOA, the old agreement with Iran, which he closed down. So so the rumor is that Steve Witkoff, who is his envoy to the Middle East, is already talking to the Iranian, and that for sure would, earn him a Nobel Prize and universal love, I guess, or maybe something close to it, as well as lower oil prices. So yeah, I mean, we have a hyperactive president who, is on even when you and I are getting some well-needed sleep, and God knows, what he'll come up with. But in terms of next week, definitely the Munich Security Conference is a data point to keep in mind. So
on that and everything, I think I was talking to Henry, so people haven't, about having his friend Sam come back on, who was kind of the kind of Russia, Ukraine specialist, and gave the heads up. And it kind of was like 2 days before the invasion, basically saying he did think it was going to happen. So maybe we'll have kind of a webinar with him and talking about how kind of a ceasefire could look. But for our clients who haven't seen it, Varesh, Henry, and Caroline did kind of like what assets and countries would be most benefit or most impacted. Obviously, Eastern Europe, particularly, would be supported by that. And my view, which has been for a long time, that I think the U.S., especially Trump, will really focus on Eastern Europe. And having a very strong relationship with that, and probably to slight detriment of probably the Western Europe as much.
Well, it depends on what happens to the elections in Germany and in a couple of years in France. But definitely. No, that would be super interesting, getting Sam to give us his take.
Yeah.
So
anything else? Yeah, anything else in there?
So this makes the data seems almost boring, but we have another CPI print and retail sales, and there I agree with the consensus. So the CPI, will remain around, I think, 2 and 2.9%, which we will also get a PPI, so an estimate of PCE, but it seems to me that we are really stuck in a range there. So I'm not expecting big surprises. And for retail sales,
Sorry. So just on the CPI, if Trump and Bessent continue to go down this path like they said, do you see CPI going higher, core CPI going higher, or do you think, even though that wages are going up somewhat, you think they'll be able to stay in this kind of 2.7, 2.9 range?
I think they hope to stay in that range. I suspect they will police prices. I mean, the advantage of a monopolistic economy like the US is there are very few retailers. So I suspect they probably send out word, or will send out word, that the increase in tariffs on China should not be used as an excuse for raising prices. So that's where the competition policy, perhaps more so than government fiat, that's where it's really important. And they want real wages. And so, it's...
So like Walmart, Costco, Amazon,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess they don't want to be taken apart on X or Twitter by Elon or whatever.
Yeah, very interesting.
Sorry, go ahead. So retail sales
and then we will get retail sales where the headline number is zero, but the control group, which is what I look at because that's what is less volatile and used to compute consumption in GDP, it's 40 basis point, which seems a respectable number. I don't expect a break in the trend of a super strong consumption, in part because I'm starting to suspect, and I will research it some more, but I'm starting to suspect that since households cannot afford to move to bigger houses because of the big gap between market mortgage rates and historical mortgage rates, I suspect this is why they are spending more on durable goods, cars, phones, electronics. I think there could be a little bit of substitution there, especially if you look at the consumer debt relative to income. It's actually well below where it was before the pandemic. So people have room to borrow. And, it could be a bit of substitution. Remember, the American consumer is like the Energizer bunny. It will keep buying until it runs out of batteries, literally and figuratively. So I'm wondering, because this strength in durable goods consumption is really puzzling. And so I'm wondering if there could be some substitution there, that the strength of consumption is explained in part by the weakness of residential investment, which is down to this big difference between average and marginal mortgage rate. So I'm not sure, but I'm expecting a robust consumption number. I mean, there's no reason with wages where there is no reason to expect consumption to slow down at this stage.
Okay, cool. Anything else or?
No, let's hope that the pace of executive orders slows a little bit. We'll see.
Yeah, it's very interesting. That one of the interesting takeaways really is that idea that Trump is going to try and work with the Congress to make the tariffs kind of more permanent and more like, I guess, like structurally illegally sound. Okay, and then so a few pieces from this past week kind of recommended to our professional users is I guess Antonio's piece, or Antonio and Henry piece around on our Global Rates Weekly, the delayed tariffs meaning easier U.S. financial conditions, the central bank monitor, the Henry kind of diving into kind of Bank of England review of the 25 basis point cut and what it means going forward. Obviously, Dominique, your piece talking about higher tariffs are here to stay. We released a piece highlighting the AI central bank sentiment indice work we've been doing, which is now rolled out to the ECB, Bank of England, and BOJ. We're also looking at other ways of tying that all together. We're also looking at doing some topical analysis, so understanding the different topics that different central banks are focusing on and the increasing and decreasing in focus, which I think would be super cool. Again, the G10 FX Weekly, a lot of that stuff focusing on generally the dollar, where we've probably leaned a little bit more on kind of dollar weakness outside of the kind of long gold trade, not denominated in dollars, so pretty much both trades are working out pretty decent. Although FX vols, I'm just assuming, are starting to get crushed as we're kind of gone back in the middle of the range. And then I think that's a lot of like the interesting stuff. I mean, there's a lot of interesting EM stuff we've done this week, a lot of technical positioning.
Small 0.5, estimate minus 0.5%.
Oh, and then on the last thing, anything, some little data just came out. Any takeaways on that? Let's see.
So I'm not sure because
Wow, that looks a huge jump.
yeah,
1 year inflation. Is that possible? 10, so
it's
it's up to 12%.
it's a bit weird. Yeah, it's a huge jump, and that probably so we're talking, for the listeners, we're talking about the University of Michigan Consumer Confidence, and there's a big shortfall relative to expectations, likely on the back of a jump in 1 year inflation. expectations. I just think this 1 year jump, which is a full percentage point, 4.3% from 3.3%, it's suspect. I mean, things move, but usually when they move that much, it's noise.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The sentiment also went down.
I think it will give the administration even more of an incentive to make sure that prices stay in line.
So it's going to be tough threading the needle. Yeah, I mean, these numbers looks like between wages and inflation expectations, probably going a little bit the wrong direction for them. But it could just be short-term pain, as we said, as these undocumented workers are kind of taken out of the supply.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean that 1 year inflation expectation data, it's super volatile. It goes through spikes. And I suspect part of what we are seeing is a spike. And the issue to me is more, inflation is stuck in a range. And it's going to be tough, as we just discussed, for the administration to make sure it's stuck. But I would say one thing we didn't mention, but which I think is worth mentioning, which is great progress, is of course President Trump becoming less focused on the Fed interest rate policy and more focused on the 10-year. So
yeah,
big change also.
right. I say it did hit equities pretty hard. The market is definitely reacting. I guess interest rates are up a bit, but not not massively.
I think this is really, I mean,
it's a little bit of an outlier. You're not taking this as a huge thing. Let's see how the market reacts, but it could be a spook. But Sam may have to add this into his his economic
model. Our Sam, not the Ukraine Sam, our Sam here at Macro Hive. Definitely, he's modeling flawlessly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. Wish everyone lovely weekend of hearing it now, or a very enjoyable and profitable week ahead.
Yeah. Good luck, everybody.
Bye. Bye.